It's always great to be at Adamsville. Of course, I grew up in this town and obeyed the gospel in this congregation. My sweet wife, Joan, is a product of the Adamsville Church of Christ. I'm thankful, will forever be. And she said to tell everybody hello. My mom is here with me today. Hope you'll be able to talk to her before we leave today. She was sitting right here in the middle, the first sermon I preached, January the 1st, 1978. And I was thankful she was there then. I'm thankful she's here today. She's the best mom I've ever had. Our subject is a very wicked woman. And I thought, now if I announce the subject and then start talking about my wife, you may get the wrong idea. But here's a very wicked woman. Her name is Athaliah. We're going to be looking in 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles primarily this morning, and you might want to open those books and be ready. We'll look at a number of passages together and talk about the evil reign of a very wicked woman. If you look at 2 Kings 11:20, you'll see that the people of the land rejoiced when Athaliah died. And 2 Chronicles 23:21 says they rejoiced after they had slain Athaliah. What a sad commentary upon one's life that people rejoice when you die. But that's how wicked she was. Athaliah was one who sought power, and she was willing to do anything. I don't imagine there was anything that she would not do from what she did. She was willing to do anything to obtain that power. If you look at 2 Kings 11:1, when her son Ahaziah, who was king of Judah, died, she arose and destroyed all the seed royal. She murdered her grandchildren because of her lust for power, because she desired to have that power. Look at 2 Chronicles 24:7. And this tells us of sons that she had, obviously by another, rather than her husband Jehoram. She had sons that broke up the house of God and took the treasured things, the things that were dedicated to the Lord, and used them to serve and to worship Balaam. Balaam is the plural word for the god Baal. That's the kind of family that she had. There's no wonder then that the land rejoiced after they had slain Athaliah. Well, let's think about who she was. She was the daughter of the evil king Ahab, who was king of Israel. She was the daughter of Jezebel, who was Ahab's wife and queen. You can hardly imagine two worse parents than were Ahab and Jezebel. She was the wife of Jehoram, who was the 5th king of Judah. Ahab, her father, was the 6th king of Israel, the northern kingdom. And her husband Jehoram was the 5th king of Judah's southern kingdom. And she was the mother of Ahaziah, as I mentioned, who was the 6th king. He followed Jehoram after he died. Now look with me at 2 Kings 8:18. It's important that we note this passage, 2 Kings 8:18. And notice what it says about Jehoram, who was the husband of Athaliah. It says that he walked in the way of the kings of Israel. That was not a good way. It began with Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who made the golden calves at the northern end and the southern end of the kingdom. He walked in the way of the kings of Israel, as did the house of Ahab, because he was closely connected with the house of Ahab. And notice the last part, for the daughter of Ahab was his wife. and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. As we think about the evil reign of this wicked woman, let's begin by looking at influence. How that evil influence encourages wickedness. As I mentioned, she was the daughter of two of the most wicked people you can imagine. Look at 1 Kings 16, 30 through 33. 1 Kings 16, 30 through 33. And notice that her daddy, Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord, and notice this, above all that were before him. Now that is a statement that really ought to get our attention. He did evil above all that were before him. It is hard to imagine he could do that, but he did. Notice it says, and if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, he took to wife Jezebel. Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal. Now notice in Jezebel's name is the word Baal, after her god. She's the daughter of Ethbaal. Notice that name, Baal, in his name, who was the king of the Zidonians. And Ahab, Athaliah's daddy, served Baal. He built an altar for Baal. He built a house for Baal in Samaria. He made a grove. In the grove, they would worship the Asherah, the female god or goddess. And notice the last part. He did more to provoke the Lord God of Israel to anger than all the kings of Israel that were before him. Again, what a statement. This is Athaliah's daddy. Let's think about Jezebel, her mother. Jezebel was one who slew the prophets of the Lord, 1 Kings 18. And she told Elijah, you'll be dead before tomorrow, 1 Kings 19:2. So she slew the prophets, sought to kill Elijah. 1 Kings 21 tells us about how she secured the vineyard of Naboth for her husband Ahab. Ahab saw the vineyard of Naboth and he wanted it, and he tried to buy it, or he tried to swap land for it, and Naboth said, I'll not sell my inheritance given by the Lord. So Ahab went home and he went to bed and he turned his face to the wall and he wouldn't eat. He was pouting. His wife Jezebel asked about what was the problem. He told her. She said, as I paraphrase, I'll take care of that for you. And she did. She had letters that she forged Ahab's name on and sent out and said, we're going to have a feast and have Naboth as the guest of the feast. And then we're going to have two witnesses come in and bear false witness against him that he blasphemed, and we'll have him put to death. And that's exactly what they did. And she got the vineyard for Ahab. So when we think about Athaliah, there's her mama and her daddy. What kind of people they were. So she learned at home how to conduct herself in sinister, evil ways. She learned how to use murder to achieve her goals. She learned at home to transgress God's law and to worship Baal instead of God. It could have been different. Imagine the difference that there would have been if she had had godly parents who respected God and who believed what His Word taught and followed it and taught her to do the same. That's not what she learned at home. What are our children learning at home? Are they learning to be faithful children of God, or to worship and to serve other things? Let's notice how she influenced her husband. Now, the influence of her parents, sad indeed. But now by marriage, she becomes the queen of Judah. She married Jehoram, and Jehoram was the son of Jehoshaphat. He didn't follow the way of his father, but she married Jehoram, who was also known as Joram. Sometimes you'll see Joram, sometimes Jehoram. He was king of Judah at the same time that the king in Israel was also named Jehoram, so that gets a little confusing sometimes. But she influenced her husband for evil. Look at 2 Kings 8:16 and 17, and you'll notice that Jehoram was 32 when he began to reign, and he reigned for 8 years. And then look at verse 18. He walked in the way of the kings of Israel. That was not a good way. Beginning with the first one after the kingdom divided, Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who led Israel to sin. And now he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, as did the house of Ahab. And notice the next part. For the daughter of Ahab was his wife, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. Do you think there's a connection with that? Absolutely. Now, I could spend the rest of this morning telling you how much I appreciate what you did in helping Joan to become the person that she is, and how blessed I have been because she agreed to become my wife. And not only have I been blessed, but our children and grandchildren and others everywhere we've been, because of the good influence that helped her to be what she ought to be, and how that has been such a blessing for me. Let's think about Jehoram. If you look at 2 Chronicles 21:12 beginning, 2 Chronicles 21:12 beginning, here's a man who was the king of Judah, as I mentioned. He was the 5th king of Judah. His son, Ahaziah, would be the 6th king. But Jehoram died a horrible death. The Lord smote him with a terrible disease. And when you look at 2 Chronicles 21:12 through 20, notice these sins that God, through Elijah, listed that Jehoram had committed. First of all, he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel instead of following the good way of Jehoshaphat and Asa, kings of Judah. But then it tells us that he led the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem to go a-whoring. That is, he led them to become spiritual adulterers, in that they no longer acted as if they were married to God, but they went to become associated with idols. Then notice the next thing it says of him. He had slain his brethren. When he became king, he killed 6 of his own brothers, so that there would be no one to threaten him in occupying the throne. And so God, through Elijah, listed these sins, and now he says a plague, a great plague is going to come upon you and your people and your children and your wives and your goods, and great sickness will be yours, sickness of the bowels, until thy bowels fall out by reason of the sickness day by day. Now, medical people today have looked at this and decided that it might have been colorectal carcinoma or something like that literally made his bowels fall out. God stirred up against him the spirit of the Philistines and of the Arabians, and they came and carried away all of his goods. They carried his sons away and his wives, and all that they left him was Jehoahaz, his son, his youngest, that Jehoahaz the first. He is also known as Ahaziah. And so at the end of 2 years, his bowels fell out by reason of his sickness, so he died because of this sore disease. And notice the last part. He departed without being desired. And they buried him in the city of David, but not in the sepulchres of the kings, because of what he had done. So Athaliah influenced her husband Jehoram to do evil. She also influenced her son to do evil. When King Jehoram died, their son, Ahaziah, became the king. Now again, think of the good influence that she could have been. Not only upon her husband, but now upon her son, who's the king of Judah. Again, I think about my sweet wife, Joan, and what a blessing she's been to our children. Many times she was responsible for doing more because I was gone off preaching somewhere. And I appreciate her leading them and training them and helping them to know God and follow Him. But here is evil Athaliah. Ahaziah, her son, becomes king, and look at 2 Kings 9. I'm sorry, 2 Chronicles 22. Let's look at that one first. 2 Chronicles 22, 2 through 4. And notice what it says of Ahaziah, son of Athaliah. His mother was his counselor. Well, that part's good, isn't it? I appreciate my good mother as she taught me to respect God and to believe His Word and to try to do what was right. I didn't always do right, but she always wanted me to do right. I appreciate that. But here is Athaliah. Notice what it says about Ahaziah. His mother was his counselor to do wickedly. What a shame. What a disgrace for a mother to teach her child to do wickedly. And not only that, but the house of Ahab, they were his counselors after the death of his father to his destruction. He listened to evil counsel, and thus he did wickedly. So think about the influence that was upon Athaliah. Two of the most wicked persons we can imagine were her parents. And then the influence she had upon her husband, Jehoram, and now upon her son, Ahaziah, as she counseled him to do wickedly. 2 Kings 9 tells us that God sent Jehu to eliminate the house of Ahab. And so he killed Ahaziah, as well as Jehoram, who was the king of Israel, 2 Kings 9, and Jezebel, Athaliah's mother, died at the hand of Jehu as he came into town, and she had dolled herself up, as we say. Sitting there in the window, and she began to chide Jehu. He asked if there were any up there who were with him, and there were, and they threw her out of the window, and the dogs ate her. The dogs ate Jezebel. Athaliah influenced her other sons to do evil as well. Look at 2 Chronicles 24:7. 2 Chronicles 24:7. She had other sons, it seems, by another husband. And notice what it says, for the sons of Athaliah, that wicked woman. I don't believe there's another place, at least I didn't find it, in the Bible that says that. Here's a woman that God, through the inspired penman, records is a wicked woman. Now, it's not any worse in many ways for a woman to be wicked than it is for a man to be wicked. But it is worse in some ways because of influences that she has as wife, mother, grandmother. So that wicked woman led her sons to break up the house of the Lord and take from it the treasured things, the things dedicated to God, and to bestow them upon Balaam, to use them in worship of an idol god. That wicked woman. Do you suppose that Athaliah, who still exists today, though not upon this earth, Do you suppose that she is smiling today? She's thinking about her family. Do you suppose that she is comforting herself today by telling herself, you know, I was a good wife. I really was a good wife. Do you suppose that she is saying to herself, and I was a good mother and a good grandmother? Absolutely not. No doubt she is in remorse and will be eternally for the influences that she had. And again, it didn't have to be that way. But let's think about her evil reign. She began her reign with wickedness. It's obvious that she desired the position, being over the land of Judah. It's obvious, too, that she would do anything to obtain it, to get that for which she lusted, to have the power that she wanted. So she usurped the throne. She was not made queen by God's authority and by His approval. It may be that she looked upon this position as her destiny. You know, a lot of people have that idea in politics that it is their destiny to be a certain leader. She may even have considered it to be her right. She may have observed as the things happened, well, these things are all falling into place so that I can be over the land of Judah. To her, it may have looked just right. But she forced herself into a position to which God had not appointed her. She'd learned well, no doubt, from her family how to use evil to accomplish her desires, and without any regard to the happiness of others, even to the lives of others. She sought that power. And she continued by murdering those who might have been opponents to her having that position. 2 Samuel 7:12 through 16, though, tells us that even though she murdered her grandsons, she destroyed all the seed royal, that God promised David that his house and his kingdom would be established forever after him. His throne would be established forever, and it was. And our Lord sits upon it today. 2 Kings 11:1 through 3 shows, though, that her plan had a problem. She sought to destroy all the seed royal, but Jehosheba, who was the sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and hid him for 6 years. That would be a difficult thing to do indeed. So she began her reign with murder. She murdered her own grandchildren. She reigned for about 7 years. Her sons, as we mentioned, broke up the house of the Lord and took the treasures to serve Balaam. She followed the example of Jezebel, her mother, and brought Baal worship into Judah on a wholesale basis. And when we look at 2 Kings 11:17 through 20, 2 Kings 11:17 through 20, and we see the reforms that took place after her death, that shows us the extent of the problem of her wickedness and just how great it was. Notice 2 Kings 11:17 through 20. Jehoiada, priest, husband of Jehosheba, we mentioned earlier, made a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people that they would be the Lord's people. Obviously, they hadn't been that before because of the evil leadership of Athaliah. But now there's a covenant made, and they went to the house of Baal and broke it down and broke the altar and the images to pieces, and they slew Mattan, the priest of Baal. They brought the king Joash down from the house of the Lord. They set him upon the throne, and all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was in quiet, and they slew Athaliah with the sword beside the king's house. They made a distinct departure from the direction that their leader had taken before. And now they made a covenant to be the Lord's people. As we think about Athaliah and her evil desire and all that she sought to gain, and then we come down to the end of her life, we see that she lost her life, and with it she lost everything that she had worked to gain. Her reign and her life came to a brutal end. Look again at 2 Kings 11. Now let's look at verses 13 through 16. 2 Kings 11, 13 through 16. And notice that Athaliah heard the noise of what was going on. She went into the temple, and there was the king. And the people were rejoicing, and they were blowing the trumpets, and she tore her clothing and cried, "Treason, treason!" It just couldn't be, not in her mind, that they would act in such a way and take her from her position for which she had done so many wicked things to obtain it. 2 Chronicles 23:21 tells us that the land rejoiced after they had slain Athaliah. It's important we notice that. They rejoiced after. She wanted to take back what she had usurped, but it was not to be. So after a lifetime of evil, this wicked woman, who it seems would have done anything to obtain the things that she wanted, for which she lusted, the things that she desired, now she loses everything, but she also loses her most valuable possession, and that is her soul. Matthew 16:26, that soul is worth more than all the world. Suppose she had continued and had died of an old age and peacefully and had continued in her wickedness until that time, and no one had opposed her, and it seemed God had not opposed her and allowed her to do that. And now she comes to the end of her life, she still would have lost, because she would have lost her soul. Well, let's think about this and what conclusions can we draw. Ezekiel 16:44 tells us, "As is the mother, so is the daughter." But also look at Ezekiel 18:20. "The soul that sinneth, it shall die. The son shall not bear the iniquity of the father, neither shall the father bear the iniquity of the son." It is not the case then that children inherit evil, that they are born wicked, as some are so bold to say. They are not born wicked. A person becomes wicked. What kind of person do you think Athaliah could have been? She could have been godly. She could have been righteous. What a blessing it would have been for her if her parents had been followers of Jehovah God, and had reared her to do the same, had brought her up in the way of the Lord. That's not what happened. We learn, too, that wives may turn the hearts of their husbands to do evil. We need to be careful whom we choose to be our spouses. I tell young people as they're beginning to date, if you want to marry a faithful child of God, then date a faithful child of God. Don't go off looking in the devil's family and pick somebody over there and think that somehow, because you want it to be that way, that you know that you're going to convert this person. It may not happen. Most of the time it doesn't. If you marry a child of the devil, you're going to have problems with your daddy-in-law. That's going to be the case. And so choose wisely. Not only the husband that we'll have, or the wife, but also the companions that we have. Look at 1 Corinthians 15:33. The American Standard says, "Be not deceived, evil companionships corrupt good morals." And so evil influences allowed into our lives will lead us to do evil as well. But another lesson that we'll learn is that righteousness suffers when evil people are in power. The cause of God, the people of God suffer. In the land of Judah, the cause of God was almost snuffed out by wicked Athaliah. The temple was looted, the priesthood was forced underground, and it seemed as if evil had won the day. But only by the efforts of Jehosheba and her husband Jehoiada and the providence of God was the seed line preserved in that little fellow Joash, who would become king later. But another thing that we need to learn is that Athaliah's wicked heart stoked her selfish ambition, which led to her ultimate demise. So we should learn from this that we want to keep wickedness far away from us, not allow it into our lives, not allow it into our hearts. Run from it. Do not make those entangling alliances with it or with those who practice it. Always refuse wickedness. But as we look at this evil woman, that wicked woman, as God calls her, and the way that she lived and the way that she died, we come to this conclusion finally, and that is it did not have to be that way. She could have chosen righteousness in spite of who her parents were. She could have followed God regardless of what others did. She could have been an influence for good, leading her husband and her children to do right as well. She could not say, well, I couldn't do any better because of who my parents were, or any other such situation. She couldn't blame somebody else. It had to be her choice to choose righteousness or wickedness, and sadly, she chose wickedness. And so with us today, we have a choice to make. We can choose to live righteous lives if we want. All situations, circumstances, and past influences, regardless of all of that, we can choose to live righteously if we want. We can choose to shun, to refrain from, to go far away from wickedness and those who would influence us to be wicked if we choose. Aren't you thankful that that is the case? That God has given us that ability, that by our choices, we can choose to have a good and godly life. We can be the spouse we ought to be, the parent, grandparent we ought to be. We can be the influence for good in our community and society and in our nation that we ought to be. And we can make that choice. And friends, you can make that choice today. No doubt many, if not most here today, have already chosen the right way and the good way. Your presence indicates that. Your joining in worship today shows that you love the Lord, you want to serve Him. But it may be there are those who haven't made that choice. And sometimes people will say to me, now preacher, I know that you told me that I need to make a choice, but I'm not going to make one today. To which I respond, you've already made it, and you made the wrong one. Choose today to serve God, not to be a practitioner of wickedness, but an opponent of it, one who shines the light into that dark and wicked world and helps others as you help yourself, that you might be a blessing and be blessed eternally because you made the right choice. You exerted the correct influence. You can do that today. Believe in Jesus as the Christ, repent of all past sins, confess your faith in Him, and be baptized. That's what the New Testament teaches. That's the gospel plan of salvation. And when you're baptized into Christ, His precious blood will wash away your sins. You'll begin a new life as a new creature with a new relationship with God and His people. And you can have a good influence to help others to come and be with the Lord as well. We hope you'll make that choice if you straightway come back while together we stand and sing.